You know that feeling walking off the graduation stage, thinking your life is finally on track. 3 days later, I opened a thin file in my father's office and realized that track was never meant for me. He gave our family business to my sister, not me. When I asked why, my mother looked right through me and said I was only good at making things run, not deciding where they go. That is when I decided to let their precious empire fall apart. My name is Sophia Foster. For exactly 72 hours, I allowed myself to believe that the world was fair. The photograph from my graduation day sits on the mantelpiece in my parents' living room. Or at least I assume it still does. In that frame, the sun is hitting us just right. I am in the center, wearing that heavy black gown that smells like rental fabric and polyester, clutching a diploma that felt like a shield. My father, Grant Foster, has his heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing tight enough to leave a mark, beaming like a man who has just secured his retirement plan. My mother, Vivian, is on my other side. Her smile perfected for the camera. The kind of smile that never quite reaches her eyes, but looks fantastic on social media. And then there is Tessa. My younger sister stands slightly in front of us, angling her body so the light catches her best side, looking beautiful and bored and completely detached from the academic achievement we were supposedly celebrating. If you could hear the audio from that day, you would hear the lies. You would hear my father telling his old college buddy that I was the future of Foster Riverworks. You would hear him say that with my degree in business management and my years on the shop floor, the company was about to enter a new era. You would hear my mother chiming in about legacy and family values. You would hear me laughing, breathless and naive, thinking that the hard part was over. I thought the late nights studying while running the inventory audit were behind me. I thought the years of missing parties to fix a jammed hydraulic press had finally paid off. I was stupid. 3 days later, the reality of my life hit me not with a bang, but with the quiet slide of a drawer in a dusty office in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The transition from the manicured lawn of the university campus to the concrete floor of the workshop was jarring, but it was a transition I loved. Foster Riverworks is not a glamorous place. It is a large, echoing metal building on the outskirts of town, filled with the rhythmic thrum of CNC machines and the sharp, biting scent of coolant and cutting oil. It is a place of loud noises and dangerous movements. Most people find it abrasive. I find it grounding. I grew up in this noise. I learned to walk on this concrete. While Tessa was taking ballet lessons that she eventually quit, I was following my father around, learning the difference between a lathe and a mill before I could properly tie my shoes. That Tuesday morning was typical. The air inside the shop was already thick with humidity and the smell of heated metal. I was not wearing a business suit. I was wearing my work boots, jeans, and a polo shirt, with the company logo embroidered on the chest, a logo I had helped redesign 2 years ago. I was already sweating. One of the older machines, a temperamental cutter we nicknamed the Beast, was vibrating out of tolerance, and I had spent the first 2 hours of my morning recalibrating it. My hands were covered in a thin film of gray grease. I felt useful. I felt essential. My father was in the middle of the floor, shouting over the noise of the grinders to Eddie Ramirez, our floor foreman. Dad looked flushed, stressed, the veins in his neck bulging as he tried to explain a production delay that I had already solved 20 minutes prior. He saw me and waved me over, not with a smile, but with the frantic urgency of a man who cannot find his keys. "Sophia," he yelled, his voice struggling against the industrial din. "I need the updated liability insurance papers. The broker is on line 1 and I cannot find the file. It should be in the top drawer of the vertical cabinet." I nodded. It was a request I had fielded 100 times. I was not just the daughter, I was the unofficial secretary, the fix-it girl, the one who knew where the bodies were buried and where the tax forms were filed. I walked into the office, the sudden silence of the soundproofed room pressing against my ears. The air conditioning was humming. It was a glass-walled box that overlooked the shop floor, a fishbowl where management could watch the labor. I wiped my greasy hands on a rag I kept in my back pocket before touching the furniture. I respected this place. I respected what my grandfather had built and what my father had maintained. I went to the vertical filing cabinet. I knew exactly where the insurance documents were because I was the one who had filed them 3 months ago. I pulled the drawer open. It slid out smoothly on well-oiled tracks. I reached for the blue folder labeled insurance, but my fingers brushed against something else. It was a thin, black presentation folder that had been wedged tightly between the vendor contracts and the tax records. It did not belong there. It looked too new, too pristine against the tattered edges of the older files. A white adhesive label was centered on the front cover. Transition ownership and control. I froze. My heart did not speed up. In fact, it felt like it slowed down, beating with a heavy, deliberate thud against my ribs. I knew about the transition plan. We had talked about it at dinner for years. The plan was simple. I would graduate, come on board as operations manager, work alongside Dad for 5 years, and then slowly buy him out as he retired to Florida. Tessa would receive a payout from the profits or a silent share, as she had never shown a single second of interest in manufacturing. That was the script. That was the promise. So why was there a file I had never seen? I looked out through the glass wall. My father was still arguing with Eddie. His back to me. He was distracted. I had time. I pulled the folder out. It was light. It felt insignificant in my hand. Just a few sheets of paper bound together. I opened it. The first page was an executive summary. The date was from 6 months ago. I began to read, and as I read, the English language began to look like a foreign code. I recognized the words, but my brain refused to process their meaning in this context. Proposed organizational structure. The header read, under the title, Managing Director and Majority Owner, the name printed was not Grant Foster, and it was not Sophia Foster. It was Tessa Foster. I blinked. I actually rubbed my eyes, smearing a tiny streak of oil near my temple, thinking I was hallucinating from the fumes on the shop floor. I looked again. Tessa Foster. I flipped the page, my fingers leaving faint, dark smudges on the crisp white paper. I scanned down the list of roles. I saw my mother's name listed as board advisor with a significant salary attached. I saw my father's name listed as consultant emeritus. And then I found me. I had to look for it. My name was not at the top. It was not in the bold headers. It was buried near the bottom, under a section titled Operational Continuity, Sophia Foster. Support role phase out. The breath left my lungs as if I had been punched in the gut. Phase out. There was a timeline attached. It was a Gantt chart, a visual representation of my expiration date. It showed me staying on for 18 months. The description under my column was clinical and precise. Transfer of technical knowledge. Stabilization of client relationships during leadership change. Training of new management staff. And then, at the 18-month mark, my line simply stopped. It did not taper off. It did not transition into a partnership. It just ended. I stood there in the quiet office, the hum of the air conditioner sounding like a roar in my ears. I read it again. I read it 3 times. I was looking for the clause that said this was a draft, a joke, a worst-case scenario contingency plan. But there were signatures. My father's signature was there, sprawling and messy. My mother's signature was there, tight and looped. And there was a third signature, one I recognized from the bank we used for our commercial loans. This was not a doodle on a napkin. This was a legal strategy. They were giving the company to Tessa. Tessa, who thought PPE stood for something to do with a gym membership. Tessa, who had never stayed in the shop past 5 in the afternoon. Tessa, who rolled her eyes when I talked about supply chain logistics. And me, I was the support role. I was the battery they intended to drain until it was empty, and then discard. Phase out. The phrase echoed in my mind. It was a term we used for obsolete machinery. We phased out the old hydraulic presses when the electric ones came in. We phased out a supplier when they became too expensive. You phase out things that are no longer necessary. You phase out things that have served their purpose and are now just taking up space. I looked up through the glass. My father was laughing now, clapping Eddie on the shoulder. He looked like a man without a care in the world. He looked like a man who had his succession plan all figured out. He had the workhorse to keep the lights on and the show pony to put on the letterhead. He had solved his problem. I was the problem. A wave of nausea rolled over me, hot and acidic. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march out onto that shop floor, throw the file at his feet, and demand to know why. I wanted to ask him why he let me spend 4 years in business school studying manufacturing trends if he intended to replace me with a sister who had a degree in art history. I wanted to ask him why he let me work summers, winters, and holidays for minimum wage, promising me that I was earning my equity, when all I was earning was a spot in the dumpster. But I did not move. My hands were shaking, just slightly. I made a fist, tightening my muscles until the shaking stopped. If I walked out there now, if I made a scene, I would be the emotional daughter. I would be the hysterical girl who could not handle business. They would use my anger against me. They would say, "See, this is why she cannot lead. She is too volatile." My mother would look at me with that pitting expression and say, I was overreacting. Tessa would look at me like I was crazy, and my father. He would probably lie. He would say it was just paperwork, that I did not understand the big picture. I looked down at the file one last time. Support role. They needed me. That was the only reason I was still here. They needed me to run the machines, to talk to the suppliers, to keep the clients happy. Because Tessa could not do any of those things. If I left today, the place would grind to a halt within a week. They knew that. That is why they needed 18 months. They needed 18 months to suck the knowledge out of my head and pour it into someone else. I felt something cold settle in my chest. It replaced the heat of the anger. It was a heavy, solid weight, like a block of ice sitting right next to my heart. I closed the folder. I wiped the smudge I had made on the cover with the edge of my sleeve, erasing the evidence of my touch. I slid the black folder back into the cabinet, wedging it exactly where I had found it, between the vendor contracts and the tax records. I pushed the drawer closed until it clicked. I grabbed the insurance file I had been sent to retrieve. I took a deep breath. I checked my reflection in the glass of a framed award on the wall. My face was pale, but my eyes were dry. I looked calm. I looked like Sophia Foster, the dutiful daughter, the reliable worker, the girl who fixed things. I opened the office door and stepped back out into the noise. The heat hit me instantly. "Here you go, Dad," I said, handing him the blue insurance folder. My voice did not crack. It sounded completely normal. "Thanks, honey," he said, taking it without looking at me. "You are a lifesaver." I watched him walk away, heading toward his office with the papers he needed to protect his asset. His asset, not ours, his and Tessa's. I turned back to my machine. The beast was waiting for me. I picked up my wrench. I tightened the bolt I had been working on. I focused on the metal, the grease, the simple mechanics of cause and effect. They had a plan for me. They had a timeline. They had defined my value and set an expiration date on my loyalty. They thought I was a tool to be used and then shelved. I tightened the bolt until my knuckles turned white. If they had already planned my life, detailed down to the month of my departure, then I was free to do something they had not accounted for. I could plan my silence. I went back to work, and for the first time in my life, I did not work for the legacy. I worked for the exit. At 24 years old, my hands do not look like the hands of a woman who just graduated with honors from a prestigious business program. They are rough, mapped with tiny white scars from slip-ups with deburring tools, and my fingernails are cut short to the quick because you cannot keep a manicure when you are elbow-deep in an industrial gearbox. I grew up in Foster River Works. Other kids had playgrounds with wood chips and plastic slides. I had the shop floor in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I had the rhythmic, thumping heartbeat of the hydraulic presses and the high-pitched scream of the metal saws. I learned to count by sorting washers into plastic bins. I learned to read by sounding out the warning labels on drums of chemical solvent, to understand why the file in my father's office cut me deeper than any knife ever could. You have to understand that I did not just work there. I was part of the machinery. By the time I was 16, I was the person everyone looked for when the lights flickered or a belt snapped. They did not look for Grant Foster. My father was the face of the company, the man who shook hands at the Rotary Club and played golf with suppliers. I was the person who knew that machine number 4 had a temperament and needed to be warmed up for exactly 20 minutes before you ran aluminum through it. I was the one who knew that the loading dock door jammed in the winter if you did not kick the bottom left corner just right. I became the default setting for every crisis. If a shipment was late, Sophia would drive the truck. If a drawing was wrong, Sophia would redline the CAD file. If the bathroom pipes burst, Sophia would know where the shutoff valve was. I never waited to be asked. In a factory, hesitation is expensive. You see a problem, and you fix it. That was the code I lived by. It was a language of action, not words. The older guys on the floor, men like Eddie Ramirez, who had been there since before I was born, stopped treating me like the boss's daughter a long time ago. To them, I was just the kid who wasn't afraid to get dirty. They respected me because I did not stand on the catwalk and point fingers. I was down in the pit with them, sweating through my shirt, cursing when a bolt stripped, and staying until the job was done. My father loved to talk about legacy. He used that word like a religious chant. He would stand at the head of the conference table during our quarterly all-hands meetings, his chest puffed out. Speaking about the Foster name and what we were building for the future, he would talk about how this business was the blood in our veins. When he said those things, he would look out at the room with misty eyes, and everyone would nod. But whenever he spoke to me directly, the word legacy never came up. Our conversations were transactional. They were short, sharp bursts of demand. "Sophia, the inventory count on the steel sheets is off," he would say without looking up from his phone. "Fix it. Sophia, the client from Chicago is screaming about the lead time. Calm them down. Sophia, we are short-staffed on the second shift. You need to cover the floor." There was never a thank you. There was never an acknowledgement that I was doing the work of 3 people. It was simply expected. It was the rent I paid for existing in his orbit. I told myself this was his way of training me. I told myself he was hard on me because he wanted me to be tough enough to take over. I thought he was forging me in the fire. Just like we tempered steel. I thought the pressure was a form of love. My mother, Vivian, viewed the factory differently, to her. Foster River Works was not a place of noise and sweat. It was a prop. It was the backdrop for her carefully curated life. She did not know the difference between a lathe and a mill, and she did not care to learn. What she cared about was the logo. She spent months agonizing over the shade of blue on our letterhead. She loved the annual company picnic, not because she liked the workers, but because it was a photo opportunity. She would arrive in a pristine sundress, holding a basket of cookies she had not baked, and pose for pictures that would end up on Facebook with captions about family tradition and American manufacturing. She loved the idea of being a business owner's wife. She loved the status it gave her at the country club, but she hated the reality of it. If I came home smelling of coolant, a smell that clings to your skin like a second layer, she would wrinkle her nose and tell me to shower immediately. "You look like a mechanic." "Sophia," she would say, her voice tight with disapproval, "it is not dignified." Then there was Tessa. If I was the grease, Tessa was the polish. My sister was 2 years younger than me, but she seemed to exist in a different universe. While I was in the back room reconciling invoices, Tessa was in the front lobby greeting clients. She had a way of speaking that was smooth and rehearsed. She knew exactly when to laugh at a bad joke. She knew how to make people feel important. She would breeze into the factory once or twice a week, usually when a high-profile customer was touring the facility. She would wear a hard hat that looked like it had never touched a speck of dust, and she would point at machines she could not operate and say things like, "We are so proud of our efficiency ratings." The clients ate it up. They loved her. She was the bright, shining face of the future. She was clean. She was charismatic. She represented the finished product, shiny and packaged, while I represented the messy, chaotic process of making it. I remember one afternoon specifically. I was under the conveyor belt on line 2, trying to dislodge a piece of scrap metal that had jammed the rollers. I was covered in grime, sweat dripping into my eyes. I heard voices above me. It was my father and a representative from a large automotive group. "And this is my daughter, Tessa," my father said, his voice swelling with pride. "She is taking a keen interest in the operations side of things." I slid out from under the belt, wiping my hands on my pants, expecting him to introduce me as well. I stood up, adjusting my safety glasses. The client looked at me, then looked at Tessa, who was standing there in a white blazer, smiling that perfect smile. "Oh, hello," Tessa said to me, her tone dismissive, like she was speaking to a janitor she did not know. "Could you get us some water for the conference room?" "It is terribly hot in here." My father did not correct her. He did not say, "Actually, this is my other daughter, the one who just fixed the machine so you can get your parts." He just ushered the client away, leaving me standing there with grease on my face, invisible in plain sight. The worst part, the part that makes my stomach turn now that I look back, was the money. For years, whenever I asked about a formal salary, my father would wave his hand and give me the same speech. "Sophia, honey, we are putting everything back into the business right now," he would say. "You know how tight the margins are. We are building this for you. Why take money out of your own pocket? I am paying for your car, your phone, your living expenses. Just put it on the company card. We will settle up a proper compensation package when you graduate and take the reins." I believed him. I was 22, then 23, then 24. I did not have a savings account of my own. I did not have a 401k. I had a credit card with my name on it that was paid by the company, which meant every purchase I made was scrutinized by my mother. If I bought a coffee, she knew. If I bought a new pair of work boots, she asked why the old ones were not good enough. I was an adult woman working a full-time job, yet I had the financial autonomy of a teenager on an allowance. Meanwhile, Tessa drove a convertible that the company leased. She had an apartment in the city that the company paid for as a consulting office. I saw the checks go out. I saw the expenses. I justified it to myself by saying that I was investing in my equity. I was sacrificing now so that later, when I was running the place, I would have the moral high ground. I was earning my ownership through sweat equity. That belief carried me through college. I did not have the typical university experience. I did not go to parties on Thursday nights. I did not join a sorority. I went to morning classes, drove 40 minutes to the factory, worked until 7 or 8 at night, and then stayed up until 2 in the morning studying for exams. I remember my junior year finals week. I had a macroeconomics exam at 8 in the morning, the night before. A storm knocked out the power at the plant, and the backup generator failed. My father was in Florida at a conference. He called me in a panic. "Sophia, you have to go down there." He screamed into the phone, "We have $20,000 of inventory in the temperature-controlled unit. If the temp goes up, we lose it all." I went. I spent the entire night in the freezing rain with a flashlight in my mouth, rewiring the transfer switch on the generator because the maintenance guy was out sick. I got the power back on at 4 in the morning. I slept for 2 hours in my car in the parking lot, washed my face in the break room sink, and drove straight to campus to take my exam. I got an A on that exam. I remember staring at the grade later, feeling a profound sense of validation. I thought that A meant something. I thought my degree was going to be the key. I thought that once I handed my father that diploma, the dynamic would shift. I thought the days of being the invisible fixer were over. I thought I would walk into the boardroom, place my degree on the table, and the door to my future would unlock. I was so naive. I worked 50, sometimes 60 hours a week while taking a full course load. I missed my best friend's 21st birthday because we had a rush order for a medical supply company. I missed Thanksgiving dinner 2 years in a row because we were doing inventory and someone had to supervise the temp workers. I gave everything. I poured my youth, my energy, and my sanity into the concrete foundation of Foster River Works. I thought I was building a throne. I did not realize I was just building a pedestal for my sister to stand on. The realization I had in the office 3 days after graduation did not just break my heart. It recontextualized my entire existence. All those years. I thought I was an apprentice. I thought I was the heir apparent. But looking back now, through the lens of that phase-out document, I see the truth. I was never the heir. I was the help. They did not keep me around because they wanted me to lead. They kept me around because I was cheaper than hiring a plant manager. They kept me around because I cared too much to let the business fail. And they knew they could exploit that emotional connection. They weaponized my loyalty. They turned my love for the family into a chain and shackled me to that shop floor. I remember one distinct moment from just a month ago. I was showing my father a new workflow I had designed to increase output by 15%. I had spent weeks on it. I had color-coded charts and data projections. I laid it all out on his desk, excited to show him that I was ready for the next level. He barely glanced at it. He was looking at a brochure for a boat he wanted to buy. "That is great. Sophia," he said, turning the page of the brochure. "Just make sure it works. I do not want any headaches. Just make sure it works." That was my entire purpose in their eyes. I was the mechanism that made things work, so they did not have to have headaches. I was the buffer between them and the hard reality of earning $1. When I walked out of that office with the insurance file, carrying the secret of my own obsolescence, the shop floor looked different to me. The noise was the same. The smell was the same, but the feeling was gone. I looked at the machine I had spent the morning fixing. I looked at the grease under my fingernails, the grease my mother hated, the grease my sister never had to touch. I realized then that the door to the boardroom didn't just have a lock I couldn't open. It was a painted door. It was a mural on a brick wall. It looked real from a distance. It looked like an exit, an entrance, a way forward. But it was just an illusion designed to keep me running on the treadmill, chasing a destination that did not exist. They had used my ambition against me. They had used my need for their approval to extract free labor from me for half a decade. I took a breath, inhaling the familiar scent of steel and deception. I had spent my life fixing their mistakes. I had spent my life keeping their machine running. But a machine cannot run without an operator. And if the operator decides to walk away, it does not matter how shiny the paint is or how perfect the logo looks. The machine stops. And I was about to show them exactly what happens when the machine stops. The week after my graduation ceremony passed without a cake. There was no balloons tied to my desk chair and no company-wide email welcoming me to the management team. There was only the same heavy canvas apron I had worn since I was 19. It still had the stain on the left pocket from a leaky permanent marker and the fraying hem where it always caught on the corner of the sorting table. I tied the strings around my waist on that Monday morning, pulling the knot tight, and waited for something to change. I waited for my father to call me into his office and hand me a new contract. I waited for my mother to suggest we order lunch to celebrate my transition from student to full-time professional. Nothing happened. The whistle blew at 7 in the morning. The line started moving. I picked up my clipboard and went to work. To them, I had not graduated. I had simply run out of excuses to leave the building. The exclusion did not happen all at once like a door slamming in my face. It was slower, more like a room running out of oxygen. It started with the calendar. For the last 2 years, even while I was in school, I had been included on the weekly production planning invites. I would dial in from the library or skip a lecture to attend. But when I opened my email that Tuesday, the slot for the 10 o'clock strategy meeting was empty. I checked the server. The meeting was still happening. I could see the conference room from where I stood on the shop floor. I could see my father sitting at the head of the table. I could see Tessa sitting to his right, a notebook open in front of her that I knew remained blank. I could see the back of my mother's head. I walked into the break room and poured myself a cup of stale coffee. I told myself it was an oversight. It had to be a mistake. My father was bad with technology. He probably just forgot to click my name when he set up the recurring series. I did not march in there and demand a seat. I did not want to be the person who needed to be invited. I wanted to be the person they could not start without. But they started without me just fine. By Wednesday, the silence from the outside world began. For 5 years, The vendors who supplied our raw aluminum and the logistics coordinators who managed our trucking routes had emailed me directly. They knew that if they emailed Grant, he would not reply for 3 days. They knew that if they emailed me, they would have an answer in 10 minutes. I watched my inbox. It was disturbingly quiet. I walked past Tessa's desk later that afternoon. Her screen was open. I saw an email from our primary steel supplier. The subject line was regarding the upcoming quarter's allocation. That email used to come to me. Now, it was addressed to Tessa. I stood there for a moment, pretending to look for a stapler, and read her reply over her shoulder. Hi, Gary. Thanks so much for reaching out. We are so excited about the synergy for the next quarter. Let's definitely circle back on those numbers, best. Tessa. It was beautiful. It was polite. It was also completely useless. She had not confirmed the tonnage. She had not asked about the fluctuating surcharges on the alloy. She had not locked in the delivery dates. She had just used a lot of exclamation points and the word synergy. Gary, the supplier, would read that and assume everything was fine. He would not ship the steel because she had not actually placed the order. In 3 weeks, we would run out of material. The line would stop. And guess who would have to make the emergency phone calls to find scrap metal at a premium price? Me. But I did not say anything. I did not lean over and tell her that she needed to reference the purchase order number. I walked away. The breaking point of that first week came on Thursday night. It was raining. A hard, driving rain that hammered against the corrugated metal roof of the factory like buckshot. It was 11 at night. I was the only one left in the building. I was there because a shipment of custom brackets for a hospital construction project in Chicago was scheduled to go out at 6 the next morning. And the packing slip was missing. If those brackets did not arrive by noon on Friday, the construction crew would trigger a penalty clause in our contract. We would lose $5,000 for every hour of delay. My phone rang. It was the trucking dispatcher. He was screaming. The driver was at the gate. But the electronic gate code had been changed that afternoon, and nobody had told the night shift. The driver was about to turn around and leave. I ran out into the rain. I did not have an umbrella. I sprinted across the asphalt, soaked to the bone in seconds, and manually keyed in the override code to open the heavy steel gates. I waved the truck in. I climbed into the forklift, my wet clothes sticking to the vinyl seat, and loaded the 3 pallets myself because the night loader had called in sick. I printed the new packing slip. I signed the bill of lading. I handed the driver a thermos of coffee I had brewed for myself and thanked him for waiting. I watched the taillights fade into the storm. I had saved the contract. I had saved the penalty fees. I had saved the company's reputation. I drove home at 1 a.m, shivering, my heater blasting, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and pride. I thought that surely this would be noticed. The logs would show my badge swipe. The camera footage would show me on the forklift. The next morning, the sun was shining. The storm had passed. I walked onto the floor at 7:30, ready to get back to the grind. My father was standing by the time clock with a box of donuts. He had gathered the morning shift workers around him. He looked happy. He looked relieved. I just got off the phone with the Chicago team. He announced, his voice booming, the brackets arrived an hour early. The site manager is thrilled. I stepped closer, waiting for him to nod at me, waiting for him to say that Sophia came in clutch again. I want to give a special shout out to Tessa. My father said. I stopped walking. Tessa was standing next to him, holding a maple donut, looking fresh and rested. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that cost more than my weekly paycheck. She coordinated with the logistics team all week to make sure this happened. My father continued, "It is that kind of high-level oversight that keeps us competitive. Great job, sweetie." The workers clapped. They wanted donuts. They did not care who signed the paper. Tessa smiled. She did not look at me. She did not say, "Actually, Dad, I was at a wine tasting last night while Sophia was driving a forklift in the rain." She just took a bite of her donut and said, "Teamwork makes the dream work. Everyone." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was not anger. It was something colder. It was clarity. They did not just want my labor. They wanted my ghost. They wanted the work to happen by magic so they could attach their names to the result. I turned around and walked back to my station. I did not take a donut. Later that day, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from Instagram. My mother had posted a new photo on the official Foster Riverworks account. I unlocked my phone and looked at the screen. The picture was high definition. It showed Tessa standing next to the new 5-axis CNC machine I had spent 3 months calibrating. I had fought with the German manufacturers for weeks to get the software patch that made it run correctly. I had written the manual for the operators, in the photo. Tessa had her hand resting lightly on the control panel. She looked like a visionary. She looked like she owned the place. The caption read, "Innovation runs in the family. Our director Tessa Foster inspecting the new line. Her vision for the future of manufacturing is what drives us forward." Women in business. Foster legacy. Next gen. Vision. I looked at the machine in the photo. If Tessa actually pressed the button her hand was resting on, she would have engaged the emergency stop and halted production for 2 hours. She did not know that. My mother did not know that. The 500 people who liked the photo did not know that. Only I knew that. I put the phone down on my workbench. I looked around the factory. I really looked at it. For years. I thought this place ran on systems. I thought it ran on the protocols my father bragged about. But as I watched the flurry of activity, the guys shouting over the noise, the forklifts weaving in and out, the sparks flying from the welders, I realized the truth. This place did not run on a system. It ran on a habit, and that habit was me. When the inventory numbers were wrong in the computer, nobody fixed the database. They just asked Sophia. When the client sent a drawing in the wrong file format, nobody learned how to convert it. They just forwarded it to Sophia. When the fire inspector came, nobody knew where the binder was. They just paged Sophia. I was the WD-40 that kept the rusted gears of this family empire from seizing up. I was the patch on the leaking pipe. Without me, there was no vision. There was just a lot of expensive equipment and people pretending to know how to use it. I was tightening a clamp on a workbench when I felt a presence beside me. It was Eddie Ramirez. Eddie had been with us for 30 years. He had known me since I was in diapers. He had taught me how to drive a stick shift in the company parking lot when I was 15. He was a man of few words, his face weathered by years of metal dust and hard sun. He did not look at me. He looked straight ahead at the lathe, pretending to inspect the cutting bit. "They are scrubbing you out, kid," he said quietly. His voice was low, barely audible over the hum of the ventilation fans. I kept working. I did not want him to see my eyes. "What do you mean?" "Eddie," I asked, keeping my tone even. "I hear things," he said. "When the clients come in now, your dad walks them right past your station. He introduces Tessa. He tells them she is the one handling the big accounts. They are changing the air in the eyes of the customer. They want the market to get used to her face before they push you out the door." I tightened the clamp until my wrist hurt. "I know," I whispered. Eddie spat on the floor, a violation of the rules that I would normally have corrected. "It is not right," he said. "She does not know a drill bit from a lipstick. This place will fold in 6 months without you." "It might," I said. He looked at me then. His dark eyes were full of sympathy, and that hurt more than the cruelty. "Why do you stay?" he asked. "Why do you let them do this?" I finally looked at him, because, "Eddie," I said, "I need to make sure I am right." He nodded slowly, as if he understood something I had not fully said. Then he tapped the machine with his wrench and walked away. I did not go to the office to complain. I did not storm into the conference room to correct the record. I did not comment on my mother's Instagram post. Instead, I opened my own notebook. It was a small, black pocket notebook that I kept in my apron. I wrote down the date, Thursday, May 24th, emergency shipment to Chicago, dispatched by Sophia, credited to Tessa. I turned the page. Friday, May 25th, supplier negotiation with Gary, handled by Tessa. Outcome, no purchase order confirmation sent. I was not just working anymore, I was collecting evidence. Every time they left me off an email, I saved a copy. Every time they took credit for my work, I noted the time and the witnesses. Every time Tessa sent a hollow reply that jeopardized a contract, I logged it. They thought I was silent because I was defeated. They thought I was keeping my head down because I accepted my role as the support staff. They thought I was a good soldier, but I was not a soldier. I was a court stenographer. I was documenting the crash before the plane even hit the ground. If they wanted to erase me, I would let them. I would let them erase me right out of the equation. And then, when the variables stopped adding up and the math fell apart, I would be the only one holding the answer key. I put the notebook back in my pocket, feeling the sharp corner of it against my hip. It felt like a weapon. I picked up my wrench. I had work to do. For now. The following Tuesday offered me a window of opportunity that was as narrow as it was dangerous. My father had taken Tessa and my mother to a lunch meeting with the local Chamber of Commerce. They were going to discuss the rebranding of the company's image. I was not invited because, according to my father, someone had to stay behind to monitor the midday shift change. The moment their car pulled out of the lot, kicking up a cloud of dust that settled on my windshield, I turned off the lathe I was supervising. I told Eddie I was going to the office to check on a purchase order for the welding gas. It was a lie, but lies were quickly becoming the only currency I had left. The office was silent. It was a terrifying kind of silence. Usually, the phone was ringing or my father was shouting into his dictaphone. Now, the only sound was the hum of the server rack in the corner and the thud of my own pulse in my ears. I went straight to the vertical filing cabinet. I did not hesitate this time. I knew exactly where the black folder was. I pulled it out. But this time, I did not just read it. I took my phone out of my pocket and I began to photograph every single page. I needed to see the fine print. The first time I had opened this file, I had been in a state of emotional shock. I had been looking for my name and finding only an insult. Now, I was looking for the mechanics of the murder. I was looking for the weapon. I flipped past the organizational chart and found a section I had missed before. It was titled Authority Limits and Financial Controls. I ran my finger down the page. The text was dry, legalistic, and brutal. It outlined exactly who was allowed to spend the company's money and how much they were allowed to touch. Level 1. Signatory Authority. It read, Capital Expenditure Approval Limit, $500,000. Contracts binding the company for terms exceeding 3 years. Sole discretion on hiring and termination of executive staff. Listed under Level 1 were 2 names, Tessa Foster and Vivian Foster. My stomach twisted. Tessa, who once asked me if we could pay a supplier in gift cards, was being given the power to spend $500,000 with a signature. I looked for Level 2. That was usually for department heads. It had a limit of $50,000. The name listed there was a blank line, presumably for a future hire they intended to bring in once I was gone. And then I found Level 3. Level 3 Signatory Authority. Operational purchases only. Maintenance supplies and raw materials strictly within pre-approved budget variances. Cap limit $2,000. Beside Level 3 was my name, Sophia Foster. $2,000. I stared at the number. I felt a cold laugh bubbling up in my throat. But I swallowed it down. $2,000 was not enough to buy a replacement motor for the main conveyor belt. $2,000 was barely enough to cover the weekly coolant refill. They had not just demoted me, they had neutered me. They had stripped me of the ability to do my job effectively. If a machine broke down and the part cost $3,000, I would have to go to Tessa, beg for her permission, and wait for her to sign a check while the production line stood still and lost money. They were turning me into a child asking for allowance, but it was the next page that made the blood drain from my face entirely. I turned the sheet over. This section was denser, filled with banking jargon and clauses that required a magnifying glass to read. It was an addendum regarding the transfer of shares. Transfer of majority ownership from Grant Foster to Tessa Foster is contingent upon the execution of the collateral agreement with Summit Harbor Bank. The document stated, I froze. Summit Harbor Bank. We had banked with a local credit union for 30 years. My grandfather had played poker with the branch manager. Why were we suddenly involved with Summit Harbor? They were a regional corporate bank known for aggressive commercial lending and private equity deals. They did not deal with small family machine shops unless there was something massive on the table. I read on. The legal language was complex, but I had spent 4 years studying business law. I parsed the sentence structure. I broke down the clauses. Refinancing of existing assets to secure liquidity for expansion into renewable energy sector components. Loan facility of $5 million tied to the successful restructuring of management and rebranding initiative. I leaned back against the filing cabinet. The folder heavy in my hand. This was not just about my father playing favorites. This was not just about my mother wanting a pretty face on the brochure. This was a financial chess move. My father was leveraging the entire company. He was taking out a massive loan of $5 million to pivot the business, and the bank had clearly demanded a restructuring. But why Tessa Banks cared about risk? Banks cared about competence. Why would Summit Harbor agree to lend $5 million to a company run by a 22-year-old with no experience? I kept digging. I flipped to the back of the folder, where a few loose papers were paper-clipped together. They looked like minutes from a meeting. The date at the top was from 3 months ago. I remembered that date. It was a Tuesday. I had worked until 10 at night that day because we were auditing the warehouse. My father had told me he was going to a dinner with potential investors. He had told me not to wait up. I read the minutes. Attendees: Grant Foster, Vivian Foster, Michael Thorne Sr., VP, Summit Harbor Bank, topic continuity and market perception. I scanned the bullet points. They were discussing the conditions of the loan. And then I saw the name that made everything click into place. The name that explained why I was still here. The name that explained why they had not just fired me on graduation day. Stonegate Mobility Group. My breath hitched. Stonegate was our whale. They were a massive defense contractor that manufactured all-terrain vehicles. I had landed that account myself 2 years ago. I had flown to Virginia. I had sat in their boardroom. I had walked their engineers through our quality control process. I had convinced them that Foster River Works could hit tolerances that our competitors could not. Stonegate accounted for 40% of our annual revenue. If Stonegate left, the lights went out. The meeting minutes were explicit. Bank concern: risk of client attrition during leadership transition. Stonegate contract is up for renewal in 8 months. Action item. This part was underlined in red ink. Stonegate trusts Sophia. The technical relationship is entirely dependent on her oversight. Must manage perception during transition. Sophia must remain visible and active until the renewal is signed. Separation strategy to be executed post-renewal. I read the sentence again. Stonegate trusts Sophia. Must manage perception. It was not a compliment. It was a strategy for containment. They knew exactly how valuable I was. They knew that if I left today, Stonegate would pull the contract tomorrow because Stonegate did not trust Grant. And they certainly did not know Tessa. The engineers at Stonegate called me on my personal cell phone. We spoke the same language. We trusted each other. My family was using me. They were not keeping me because they loved me. They were not keeping me because they wanted to be fair. They were keeping me as human collateral. I was the bait to keep the big fish on the hook. They intended to parade me around for the next 8 months. Let me do all the work to renew the contract. Let me assure Stonegate that everything was stable. And then, the moment the ink was dry on the renewal, they would trigger the phase-out. They were going to use my reputation to secure the loan for Tessa to play with. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to close my eyes. I gripped the edge of the desk. All the times my father had said, "We need you." He meant, "We need your credibility." All the times my mother had said, "Don't be selfish." She meant, "Don't ruin the deal." They looked at me, and they did not see a daughter. They did not see a partner. They saw a piece of duct tape. They saw a temporary fix to hold the engine together until they could sell the car. I looked at the note again. Separation strategy to be executed post-renewal. They had a date. They had a literal date on the calendar for when they were going to dispose of me. They were just waiting for me to secure their fortune first. I heard the sound of tires on gravel outside. They were back. My hands were shaking. But my mind was crystal clear. It was a cold, sharp clarity that I had never felt before. I quickly arranged the papers back in the order I found them. I slid the black folder back into the slot between the vendor contracts and the tax records. I wiped the surface of the desk where my hand had rested. I walked out of the office and back onto the shop floor, just as the front door opened. My father walked in, laughing at something Tessa had said. My mother was checking her makeup in a compact mirror. They looked happy. They looked like a family that had just secured their future. I stood by the lathe, watching them. They thought they were playing a smart game. They thought they had covered every angle. They had the bank. They had the plan. They had the compliant daughter who would work hard for approval until it was too late. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had put it in writing. They had admitted, in their own private minutes, that the entire empire rested on one single point of failure: Stonegate's trust in me. They thought that note was a liability to be managed. I looked at my father, who waved at me casually as he walked toward his office, oblivious to the fact that I had just read his blueprint for my destruction. He did not realize that the note was not a liability. It was leverage. If Stonegate trusted me, then Stonegate belonged to me, not to the company, not to the name on the building, to me. I picked up a metal shaving from the floor, feeling the sharp edge against my thumb. They wanted me to manage the perception fine. I would manage it. I would manage it so perfectly that they would never see the cliff coming until I stepped aside and let them drive right over it. I smiled at my father. It was a small, tight smile. "Welcome back," I said. "Hope the lunch was productive, very productive." "Sophia," he said, patting his stomach. "Big things coming. Big things." I nodded. "You have no idea. I went back to work. I had 8 months until the Stonegate renewal. 8 months to document every lie. 8 months to solidify every relationship. 8 months to make sure that when I finally walked out that door, I was not leaving empty-handed. I was going to take the 40% with me. The destruction of an empire does not always sound like an explosion. Sometimes, it sounds like a phone ringing in an empty room. For 5 years, my life had no boundaries. The workday ended when the work was done, and in a factory that operated on 2 shifts with global supply chains. The work was never done. My cell phone was a public utility. I answered calls at dinner. I answered emails while brushing my teeth. I drove to the plant on Sunday mornings because a sensor tripped and I was the only one who knew how to bypass the fault code without resetting the whole system. I did these things because I thought I was an owner in training. I thought every unpaid hour was a deposit into a future equity account. But now I knew the truth. I was not an owner. I was not a partner. According to the document in the filing cabinet, I was a support role slated for phase out. So, on the Monday morning following my discovery, I decided to become exactly what they said I was. I decided to become the perfect employee. I did not scream. I did not throw a wrench into the gears. Sabotage is messy, and it leaves fingerprints. Sabotage is what angry children do. I was not angry anymore. I was following a script. I decided to execute my duties strictly within the confines of the job description that did not technically exist, but which was implied by my new, diminished status. The first crack appeared at 5 o'clock on Tuesday. Usually, 5 o'clock is just a suggestion. It is the time the office staff goes home. But for me, it is usually when I finally get uninterrupted time to catch up on paperwork. But on this Tuesday, when the clock on the wall clicked over to 5, I saved my spreadsheet. I placed my pen in the drawer. I took off my safety glasses and hung them on the hook. My father was in his office, talking loudly on the phone. Tessa had left at 3 to go to a yoga class. I walked out the back door. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a moment, watching the building. It felt strange, almost physical, like leaving a limb behind. My phone sat on the passenger seat. At 5:12, it lit up. It was the second shift supervisor, calling to ask about the pressure settings on the water jet cutter. Normally, I would pick up. I would tell him to dial it back to 3,000 psi because the seals were wearing thin and we were waiting on parts. I would save the seals. I would save the cut. I watched the phone ring. I let it go to voicemail. I drove home in silence. I made dinner. I read a book. The phone rang 3 more times. I did not touch it. I was not authorized to approve technical adjustments after hours. That was a management decision. And I was just support. By Wednesday morning, the confusion on the shop floor was palpable. I walked in at 8 o'clock sharp. I did not come in early to start the coffee or print the production schedules. I walked to my desk, sat down, and waited for instructions. The second shift supervisor, a good man named Marcus, came up to me. He looked tired. "Sophia," he said, frustration lining his voice. "I called you 4 times last night. We blew a seal on the water jet. We had to shut it down for 6 hours. We are behind on the cut list." I looked at him calmly. "I am sorry." "Marcus," I said, "I leave my work phone at the desk now. Company policy regarding work-life balance for support staff." He looked at me like I had spoken in Greek. "Since when? Since the restructuring?" I said, "You should talk to the director of operations about the repair schedule." He walked away, muttering. He went to find my father. My father, of course, did not know the pressure settings. He told Marcus to just call the repair tech. The repair tech charged $200 an hour for emergency service. I watched the invoice come in later that day. $1,200 for a repair I could have prevented with a 30-second phone call. I filed the invoice. I did not comment on it. I just filed it under maintenance costs. The cracks began to widen quickly. Foster River Works ran on processes. Yes, but those processes were full of holes. They were full of gray areas where the manual said one thing, but reality demanded another. For years, I had been the mortar filling those cracks. I was the one who knew that supplier A always shipped late, so we had to order 3 days early. I was the one who knew that client B always changed their mind about the paint color. So we held off on powder coating until the last possible second. I stopped filling the cracks. On Thursday, an email came in from one of our mid-sized clients, a furniture manufacturer in Ohio. They were asking for a clarification on the tensile strength of the aluminum tubing for their new chair line. "Hi, team." The email read, "Can we swap to the 6061-T6 alloy for the next batch? We need it to be a bit stiffer. Let us know if that impacts the welding process." Previously, I would have replied immediately. I would have told them that, yes, we can swap, but we need to adjust the heat on the welders, or the aluminum will crack. I would have attached the revised spec sheet. Instead, I hit forward. I sent the email to Tessa. Subject client, technical question. Body Tessa. Please advise the client on this material change. As the managing director, this decision falls under your authority regarding product liability. I hit send. I watched Tessa from across the room. She was on her phone, scrolling through social media. She saw the email pop up. She frowned. She typed a quick reply. I saw her response because she copied me on it. "Hi guys. No problem at all. We can definitely switch to the 6061-T6. We love being flexible for our partners. Proceed with the order." She did not mention the welding heat. She did not mention the cracking risk. She did not ask the floor manager if we even had the right filler rod for that alloy. She just said yes, because she thought business was about saying yes. I saved her email. I printed it out. I put it in my physical file. When the order went into production 2 days later, I stood by my station and watched. The welders set up their machines. They used the standard settings because nobody told them otherwise. The sparks flew. The frames were built. They looked fine. But I knew that inside the joints, microscopic stress fractures were forming. When those chairs were loaded, they would snap. It was not my job to inspect them. My new job description said, support role, administrative, quality control. Final sign-off was listed under the managing director's duties in the new chart. Tessa signed the release paperwork without even walking out to the floor. She liked signing things. It made her feel important. The shipment went out. I felt a knot in my stomach, a physical sickness at letting bad work leave our dock. It went against everything I took pride in. But I had to remind myself this was not my work. This was their work. I was just the ghost in the machine. The tension in the factory started to turn into a heavy, suffocating atmosphere. The workers knew something was wrong. They sensed the vacuum where my leadership used to be. On Friday, a crisis emerged that threatened to derail the entire week. We had a rush order for a local automotive plant. They needed 500 customized bolts by Monday morning. It was a simple job, but the timeline was tight. To get this done, we usually used a trick. I had a contact at the steel yard who would let us pick up material after hours on Friday if I brought him a 6-pack of beer. It bypassed the Monday morning delivery route and gave us the weekend to machine the parts. At 2 o'clock on Friday, the floor manager, Eddie, came to my desk. "Sophia," he said, leaning in close, "we are out of the hex stock. We need to do the run to the yard. You going to call your guy?" I looked up from my computer. I was typing a report that nobody would read. "I cannot do that." "Eddie," I said softly. "What?" He looked confused. "We do it every time. If we wait for the truck on Monday, we miss the deadline." "I know," I said. "But using personal vehicles for material transport is a liability violation, and buying alcohol for vendors is against the new corporate compliance policy that Tessa sent out last week." Eddie stared at me. His face was a mask of disbelief. "Sophia, come on. It is me. We need the steel." I leaned back in my chair. I lowered my voice. "Eddie, look at the org chart. I have a spending limit of $2,000. I have no authority to authorize overtime or off-book logistics. If I go pick up that steel and I get in an accident, or if the inventory count is off, I get fired. I am strictly support now. You have to ask Tessa." Eddie looked over at the glass office. Tessa was showing a sample part to our mother. They were laughing. He looked back at me. He saw the resignation in my eyes. He saw that this wasn't about being difficult. It was about survival. He didn't argue. He just shook his head, a gesture of profound disappointment. Not in me, but in the situation. He walked up the stairs to the glass office. I watched through the window. I saw him explain the situation to Tessa. I saw Tessa look confused. I saw her gesture with her hands. She was asking why we couldn't just make it happen. She was asking why the steel wasn't there. She came down the stairs a moment later, her heels clicking on the concrete. She walked straight to my desk. "Sophia," she said, her voice tight. "Eddie says we are out of material. He says you usually handle this." I looked at her. "I usually do." I said, "But the standard delivery is Monday." "Well, we cannot wait until Monday." She snapped. "Call the guy. Do the thing you do." "I cannot," I said calmly. "I do not have a company vehicle authorization anymore. Dad took the truck keys for the sales team, and I cannot put the material on my personal credit card because my expense limit is capped." She flushed red. "Just fix it." "Sophia, God, why are you being so difficult?" "I am not being difficult." "Tessa," I said, "I am being compliant. I am following the protocol you and Dad signed. If you want the steel, you need to call a courier service, pay the rush fee, and get it delivered." "How much is the rush fee?" she asked. "About $600. I said. She rolled her eyes. "Fine, do that." "I cannot." I repeated. "My limit is $2,000, but I have already approved $1,500 for the coolant this week. The courier fee would put me over." "You have to sign it." I held out the requisition form. She stared at the paper like it was infectious. She snatched it from my hand, scribbled her signature, and threw it back on my desk. "There," she said. "Happy I picked up the paper. I am just following the rules." I said. "The courier arrived at 6 o'clock. The guys had to stay late. We paid overtime. We paid the rush fee. The job got done. But it cost us 40% of the profit margin on that job. The system was bleeding. It wasn't bleeding because I was stabbing it. It was bleeding because I had stopped applying the tourniquet. I realized something profound that week. For years, I had thought I was fighting for my place in the company. I thought I had to prove my worth, but I had it backwards. The company was not an entity that judged me. It was an organism that fed on me. It was addicted to my anxiety. It was addicted to my willingness to work unpaid hours. It was addicted to my personal relationships with vendors. It was addicted to the fact that I cared more about the outcome than the credit. When I withdrew my care, the withdrawal symptoms were immediate and violent. The silence I had created was not empty. It was heavy. It was filling up with missed deadlines, angry voicemails, and expensive invoices. I sat in my car that Friday evening. The sun was setting over the industrial park. I watched the lights of the factory flick off one by one. They thought they could replace me with a title and a fresh coat of paint. They thought the machine ran because they owned it. They were learning. One painful dollar at a time. That ownership is nothing without operation. I started my car. I had a weekend to myself for the first time in 5 years. I was going to turn off my phone, and while I slept, the stress fractures in those aluminum chairs in Ohio would continue to grow, microscopic and silent, waiting for the moment to snap. I drove away, leaving the chaos behind the gate. It was not my problem. I was just support. The phone call that changed everything did not come during a quiet moment of reflection. It came at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, right in the middle of a shift change, when the air in the shop was thick with the smell of friction and the noise was a physical wall of sound. My phone vibrated against my hip, buzzing with an urgency that felt different from the usual notifications. I looked at the screen. It was my father. I let it ring 3 times. In the past, I would have answered on the first vibration, assuming a machine was down or a client was walking through the front door. Now, I wiped my hands on a rag, took a slow breath, and walked toward the quieter loading dock before sliding my thumb across the screen. "Hello, Dad," I said. My voice was neutral. I was practicing the art of being unreadable. "Sophia." His voice was tight. It was not the booming, confident baritone he used for speeches. It was the thin, high-pitched voice of a man who was watching water rise above his ankles. "Where are you?" "I am at the loading dock," I said, checking the bill of lading for the scrap metal pickup. "Why I need you in my office," he said. "Now, I cannot," I replied, keeping my eyes on the horizon where a delivery truck was backing in. "I am supervising the load. Unless you want to authorize overtime for the dock foreman to come in early, I am the only one certified to sign the manifest." "Forget the manifest," he snapped. The sound of his hand hitting his desk echoed through the receiver. "It is Stonegate." The name hung in the air between us. Stonegate Mobility Group. The whale. The 40% of our revenue. The reason I was still employed. "What about them?" I asked. "They just got off a conference call with Tessa," he said. The anger in his voice was vibrating, but I could tell it was not directed at me. It was the anger of fear. "They are asking for you." Specifically, I leaned against the concrete wall of the dock. The cool, rough surface felt grounding against my shoulder. "I told you, Dad, I am in a support role now. I forwarded the technical specs to Tessa yesterday. She has everything she needs to answer their questions." There was a silence on the other end. It was a heavy, loaded silence. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave. It was almost a whisper. "Sophia, listen to me. The lead engineer from Stonegate, that guy David you always talk to, he just emailed me. He said Tessa does not know the difference between a load-bearing weld and a cosmetic finish. He said she tried to upsell him on a paint package when he was asking about structural integrity. I did not smile. I did not feel a rush of victory. I just felt a cold confirmation of everything I had written in my notebook. "I am sure she is just learning the ropes," I said, using the exact phrase my mother had used to dismiss my concerns a week ago. "She just needs time." "We do not have time," he shouted, losing his composure. "David said that if the technical lead is not on the next call, they are pausing the contract review. Do you understand what that means? If they pause the review, the bank sees it. If the bank sees it, the loan for the restructuring stalls." I looked at my fingernails. They were short, clean, and unpainted, practical. "So, put me on the call," I said. "I will sit next to Tessa. I will take notes." "No," he said. He sounded exhausted. "They do not want you taking notes. They want you leading the project. They want to know why you have vanished from the email chain. David asked me point blank if you were still with the company." I paused. I let the hum of the factory floor fill the silence. I let him sit in the mess he had designed. Tell them I am still here. I said, tell them I am focusing on internal operations. I tried that, he said. He was pleading now. I told them you were overseeing a system upgrade. David did not buy it. He said he has sent 3 emails to you this week regarding the prototype specs and got no reply. He said it looks like we are hiding something. I looked out at the parking lot. The sun was beating down on the asphalt. I am not hiding. Dad, I said calmly, I am following the protocol. The transition plan states clearly that all external communication goes through the managing director. That is Tessa. If I answer David directly, I am violating the chain of command. I am just doing what the paperwork says. Paperwork. He exploded. To hell with the paperwork. Sophia, we are talking about the survival of the business. I waited. I wanted him to say it. I wanted him to admit that the paper shield he had built for Tessa was made of tissue. Everything I do is in the system. Dad, I said, my voice steady, the specs, the tolerances, the history of the project. Tessa has access to the shared drive. She can read the files. No, he said, and this time, his voice broke. It was a sound I had never heard from him before. A crack in the facade of the patriarch. They do not want the files. Sophia, they do not care about the data in the system. They need trust. They need to know that the person promising the quality is the person who understands the metal. I closed my eyes. They need trust. The word hung there, heavy and ironic. He was asking me to trade on a currency he had stolen from me. He wanted me to sell my integrity to buy his retirement. He wanted me to use the trust I had built with Stonegate to cover the lie he was telling the bank. I stayed silent. I did not rush to reassure him. I did not say, "Okay, Dad, I will fix it." I just breathed. "Sophia," he asked, "are you there?" "I am here," I said. "Fix this," he said. "Please, just call David. Smooth it over. Tell him you have been sick. Tell him you were on vacation. Just get him back on board. We can figure out the titles later." Figure out the titles later. That was the trap. That was always the trap. Later meant never. Later meant after he had the money. "I will see what I can do," I said, "but I need to finish the load first." I hung up before he could argue. I stood there for a long time, staring at the phone. He had admitted it. He had said the quiet part out loud. The business was not the machines. It was not the building. It was not the brand name. The business was the faith that the clients had in the person doing the work. And he had just realized that he had fired the only person who held that faith. My phone buzzed again in my hand. I flinched, expecting him to call back. But it was not a call. It was a text message. It was from my mother. "Family dinner tonight at 7. Your father is stressed. We need to talk like adults. Do not be late." I stared at the screen. Talk like adults. The condescension dripped from the pixels. In her mind, this was just a family squabble. In her mind, I was the petulant child who was refusing to share her toys with her sister. She had no idea that her husband was staring into the abyss of a defaulted loan. She had no idea that the stress she mentioned was the sound of her lifestyle crumbling. I opened Instagram. I did not know why. Maybe I was looking for pain. Maybe I was looking for motivation. Tessa's story was the first bubble on my feed. It had been posted 20 minutes ago. It was a photo taken from inside the conference room. It showed a spread of gourmet sandwiches, a stack of untouched notepads, and a latte with perfect foam art. The caption was written in a stylish, cursive font, "Big meeting day. Leading the charge and making moves. So proud of where we are going. Girl boss leadership, Foster River Works." I looked at the timestamp. She had posted this right after the call with Stonegate. Right after the call where the client had told her father that she was incompetent. Right after she had failed to answer a single technical question. She was not living in reality. She was living in a performance, to Tessa. The job was the photo. The job was the outfit. The job was the feeling of sitting at the head of the table. She truly believed that if she acted the part, the results would follow. She did not understand that the results came from the dirt, the oil, and the years of bad coffee and sleepless nights. I looked from my mother's text to Tessa's photo, and then back to the dark screen of my phone. For the first time since I found the file, the heavy block of ice in my chest shifted. It did not melt. It hardened. It sharpened. They were not asking me to come back to the table because they respected me. They were not asking me to fix the Stonegate relationship because they wanted me to lead it. They were panicking. They were like children who had broken a vase and were terrified of the consequences. They wanted me to come in with the glue, put it back together, and then disappear again so they could claim it was never broken. They thought I would save them. They thought I would save them because that is what Sophia does. Sophia fixes the machine. Sophia smooths the edges. Sophia drives the forklift in the rain. Sophia loves the family more than she loves herself. I put the phone back in my pocket. I walked over to the truck driver who was waiting for my signature. I took the clipboard from him. I signed my name with a flourish. Sophia Foster, support staff. I handed it back to him. Drive safe, I said. He nodded and climbed into the cab. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated in my chest. I watched him pull away. They were right about one thing. I was going to handle the Stonegate situation. But I was not going to do it to save them. I was not going to do it to secure their loan. I was going to do it to show them exactly who held the power in this relationship. I walked back into the factory. The noise washed over me. I checked my watch. I had 4 hours until dinner, 4 hours to prepare, 4 hours to decide exactly how much truth I was going to serve them with the main course. They wanted to talk like adults. Fine. We would talk like adults. And adults talk about contracts, liabilities, and the price of failure. My mother's dining room has always felt less like a place to eat and more like a museum exhibit dedicated to the concept of a happy family. The table is a long, polished expanse of mahogany that gleams under the crystal chandelier. The napkins are linen, folded into sharp, architectural shapes. The silverware is heavy enough to feel ceremonial. Everything is white, cream, or gold. It is a room designed for photographs, not for living. I arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. I did not arrive at 6:55 to help set the table, as I had done for a decade. I did not arrive at 7:10 to make a dramatic entrance. I pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine of my sedan, and walked to the front door with the precision of a Swiss watch. I was wearing my work clothes. I had changed out of the grease-stained polo, but I was still in dark trousers and a plain button-down shirt. I had not put on a dress. I had not put on makeup to hide the fatigue under my eyes. I wanted them to see me exactly as I was. I wanted them to see the person who ran their factory, not the daughter they wanted to display. When I walked in, they were already seated. My father was at the head of the table, nursing a glass of scotch that looked darker than usual. My mother sat to his right, wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than the monthly maintenance budget for Line 2. Tessa was on his left, scrolling through her phone, looking bored and beautiful. "Sophia, you are here," my mother said. Her voice was light, airy, completely detached from the reality of the phone call my father had made 4 hours earlier. "Sit down. The roast is almost ready." I did not sit. I walked to the empty chair opposite my father. The place setting was perfect. The wineglass was sparkling. I was not hungry. I reached into my bag. I did not pull out a gift. I did not pull out a peace offering. I pulled out a single, stapled document. It was a high-resolution color copy of the file I had photographed in the office. I placed it in the center of the table, right on top of the floral centerpiece. The paper made a dry sliding sound against the polished wood. I had opened it to page 14, the page with the Gantt chart, the page with the timeline. I sat down. "What is this?" my father asked, though his eyes told me he already knew. He looked at the document. He saw the red ink. He saw the signatures. "I think you know what it is, Dad," I said. My voice was calm. It did not shake. It sounded like the voice I used when I was explaining a catastrophic failure to an insurance adjuster. Tessa leaned forward. She squinted at the paper, then let out a short, breathy laugh. She waved her hand as if shooing away a fly. "Oh my God. Sophia," she said, rolling her eyes. You are so sensitive. You went snooping, seriously. That is just a structural draft. It is corporate speak. It does not mean anything real. I looked at her. She was smiling. That condescending smile she used when she thought I was being difficult. It looks very real to me. Tessa, I said, it has a date. It has a bank name, and it has a very specific title for me. Support role, phase out. I turned to my father. He was staring at his scotch. Is that the plan, I asked? I pointed to the paper. 8 months. I keep Stonegate happy. I secure the loan. And then I am phased out like a piece of obsolete hardware. My father sighed. He looked old in the dim light. It is not about getting rid of you. Sophia, he said, his voice pleading. It is about evolution. The bank wants a streamlined management structure. They want a clear hierarchy. You are too valuable on the floor. We need you focused on the product. Tessa is better suited for the boardroom. She has the presence. I felt a cold fire burning in my stomach. So my future is to be the mechanic forever, I asked. While she drives the car I built, I looked at my mother. She was cutting her roast beef with precise surgical movements. She had not looked up once. Mom, I said. She put down her knife and fork. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with the linen napkin. She looked at me, and her eyes were hard. They were not the eyes of a mother looking at a child. They were the eyes of a curator looking at a display that was refusing to cooperate. Sophia, she said. Her tone was reasonable, almost gentle, which made the words cut deeper. Let us be honest. You are brilliant with the machines. You understand the grease and the noise. You are comfortable there. She gestured to the room, to the crystal, to Tessa. But this world, the world of investors and galas and public image, that is not you. She leaned forward slightly. Sophia, honey, you are good at making things run, she said, delivering the sentence that would ring in my ears for the rest of my life, but you are not the person to decide where they go. The room went silent. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. 1, 2, 3. It was a perfect sentence. It was a sentence that stripped me of my agency and reduced me to a tool. A hammer does not decide what house to build. A hammer just hits the nail. That was what she saw when she looked at me. A very reliable, very sturdy hammer. I opened my mouth to speak. I wanted to ask her if she knew who stayed up until 3 in the morning negotiating the shipping contracts. I wanted to ask her if she knew who Stonegate called when the prototypes failed. But before I could say a word, a sound cut through the silence. It was my father's phone. It was sitting on the table next to his scotch. It lit up with a harsh, blue light. A notification banner slid across the screen. It was an email. The subject line was in all caps. Urgent Stonegate contract review. My father saw it. His hand trembled as he reached for the phone. He unlocked it. He read the preview. His face turned the color of ash. What is it? Tessa asked, taking a sip of wine. My father did not answer her. He looked at me. His eyes were wide with panic. He read the email out loud, his voice shaking. Grant, we have tried to get technical clarification on the chassis specs for 3 days. The responses from your managing director have been insufficient and lack technical depth. We cannot move forward with a partner who does not understand the engineering constraints. If Sophia Foster is not involved in leading this project by tomorrow morning, we will pause all purchase orders immediately pending a full vendor audit. He dropped the phone on the table. It clattered against the wood. Pause all purchase orders. That meant the revenue stream stopped. That meant the cash flow dried up. That meant the loan application with Summit Harbor Bank would be flagged and rejected. My father looked at me. The arrogance was gone. The patriarch was gone. In his place was a desperate man. Sophia, he said. He reached across the table, as if to take my hand, but stopped short. You have to fix this. I looked at him. Fix it, yes, he said. Just call David. Call him right now. Tell him you were sick. Tell him you are back. Tell him you are taking over the project. Just smooth it over. I looked at the document in the center of the table. I looked at the phrase, phase out. You want me to save the account? I said slowly. Yes, he said. Just this once. Please. For the family. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the phone, her lips pressed into a thin line. And then what I asked. What do you mean, my father asked? I mean, after I save it. I said, after I call David and lie to him, after I use my credibility to clean up Tessa's mess. What happens then? Do we tear up this plan? Do you make me a partner, or do I go back to being the person you are phasing out in 8 months? My father stammered. We can discuss the structure later. Right now we have a crisis. So the answer is yes. I said, I save you today, so you can fire me tomorrow. My mother slammed her hand on the table. The silverware jumped. You are being incredibly selfish. Sophia, she hissed. This is your father's legacy. This is our livelihood. You are going to let the company crash just to prove a point because your feelings are hurt. My feelings are not hurt. Mom, I said, my eyes are open. Tessa laughed again. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. Oh, come on, she said. Stonegate is bluffing. They are not going to pause the orders. They need our parts. They are just trying to squeeze us for a discount. It is a negotiation tactic. Dad, do not let her scare you. They are not going to walk away. I looked at Tessa. She really believed it. She thought business was a game of poker where everyone was lying. She did not understand that in engineering, there is no lying. If the metal is too thin, the bridge falls. If the specs are wrong, the client leaves. They are not bluffing. Tessa, I said, David does not bluff. You do not know everything. Sophia, she snapped, you think you are so indispensable. I did not answer. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. My father's phone pinged again. It was not an email this time. It was a notification from our internal ERP system, the system that tracked all incoming orders and active contracts. The notification sound was distinct. It was a sharp, descending tone that meant a status change. My father looked at the screen. He did not speak. He could not speak. He turned the phone around so we could all see it. The screen displayed the Stonegate Mobility Group account status. In big red letters, the status had changed from active to on hold, suspended, underneath. There was a note from their procurement system, automatic suspension triggered by quality assurance concern. All open POs frozen, incoming shipments rejected. The silence that fell over the table was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Tessa stopped smiling. Her fork hovered halfway to her mouth. My mother went pale. She looked at the centerpiece, at the transition folder, and then at the phone. The image of the perfect dinner was shattering. My father slumped in his chair. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not anger, fear. He realized that the 40% of his revenue had just evaporated in the span of 5 minutes. I put my glass down. The sound of the crystal touching the table was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I stood up. Where are you going? My father whispered. I am going home, I said. Sophia, sit down, my mother commanded. Her voice was shaking. We are not done. You have to call them. You have to call them now. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had told me I was not the one to decide where things go. I cannot call them. Mom, I said. Why not? She screamed. Because, I said, picking up my purse. According to the document you signed, I am just support staff, and support staff are not authorized to negotiate high-level contracts. I looked at Tessa. You are the managing director. Tessa, I said, you have the vision. You decide where it goes. I turned around and walked toward the door. Sophia, my father shouted. I did not stop. I did not look back. I walked out of the museum. I walked out to my car. I drove away from the house, leaving them in the silence they had bought and paid for. They wanted to run the company without me. Now they had their chance. The sun came up on Friday morning. But for the first time in 5 years, I did not watch it rise from the rearview mirror of my sedan on the interstate. I watched it from my kitchen table with a cup of tea that was still hot. I did not put on my steel-toed boots. I did not clip my badge to my belt. I simply sat there in my pajamas and listened to the silence. It was a terrifying silence because it was the sound of my old life dying, but it was also the sound of my new leverage being born. I opened my laptop, but not to check the production schedule. I opened a blank document. I started to type a list. I wanted to see, in black and white, exactly what the support role actually entailed. I typed for 2 hours. The list was nauseatingly long. It started with the obvious things like production scheduling and inventory management. Then it went deeper into vendor relations and quality control audits. Then it went into the things that were not on any job description. Things like IT troubleshooting, hazardous waste disposal compliance, client emotional management, and Dad's password recovery. By the time I stopped typing, the document was 12 pages long. I stared at the screen. I had been doing the work of a COO, a CTO, and a janitor, all for the price of a daughter's loyalty. At 10 o'clock, I put on a blazer. I did not go to the factory. I drove downtown to a glass building that looked nothing like Foster River Works. Mara Keaton was a lawyer I had met during a business seminar my junior year. She was sharp, terrifyingly efficient, and had a reputation for eating corporate bullies for breakfast. I had kept her card in my wallet for 3 years, thinking I might need her to review a partnership agreement one day. I never thought I would need her to divorce my family. I sat in her conference room and laid everything out on the table. The black folder with the phase-out timeline, the emails from Stonegate, the log of my hours, the list I had just typed. Mara read through the documents in silence. Her face was a mask of professional concentration. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the fine print that had broken my heart. When she finished, she looked up at me. She did not look at me with pity. She looked at me with respect. "You have them, Sophia," she said simply. "I know the moral argument," I said. "But legally, they own the shares. They own the building. I am an at-will employee without a contract. They can fire me whenever they want." Mara smiled. It was a shark-like smile. "They can fire you." "Yes," she said, "but they cannot afford to lose you. Look at this." She spun the file around and pointed to a document I had glossed over. It was a technical compliance submission we had sent to Stonegate 2 years ago. It was the document that certified our factory as a Tier 1 supplier. "Look at the signature line for the quality assurance manager." Mara said. I looked. It was my signature. So I asked. I signed everything. Mara tapped the paper. "In the defense sector, the quality assurance manager is a named individual in the contract. It is not a role you can just swap out. When Stonegate signed this deal, they signed it based on the certification of Sophia Foster. If that person leaves, the certification is void until a new person is vetted, audited, and approved. That process takes 6 months." My eyes widened. 6 months. "And there is more," she said. She pulled out another file, one she had pulled from a public records search before I arrived. "Do you remember applying for a process patent about 4 years ago?" she asked. "Something about a variable cooling system for the extrusion molds?" I nodded vaguely. Dad had asked me to write up the technical description for a new method I had developed to stop the aluminum from warping. He said it was just paperwork to protect the company's IP. I signed a bunch of forms between classes and forgot about it. Mara slid the document toward me. "The patent was granted last year," she said. "And look at the inventors listed." I looked. "Grant Foster and Sophia Foster. You are a co-inventor of the core manufacturing process that Foster River Works uses to make its high-margin parts." Mara said, "You own 50% of the intellectual property rights to that process. If they push you out without a licensing agreement, you can sue them for infringement every time they turn on the machine." I sat back in my chair. The air in the room felt lighter. I had walked in there feeling like a victim. I was walking out as a partner. They do not know this. "Do they?" I asked. "Your father thinks patents are just framed certificates for the wall." Mara said, "He has no idea he handed you the keys to the kingdom." She looked at me. "So, What do you want to do? Do you want a settlement? Do you want to burn it down? I thought about the phase-out folder. I thought about my mother telling me I wasn't the one to decide where things go. I do not want to burn it down. I said, I want to charge them rent. Mara drafted the email. It was beautiful in its brevity. There was no emotion in it, no anger, no mention of the family dinner or the hurt feelings. It was purely transactional. It stated that effective immediately, Sophia Foster was resigning from her voluntary support role. It stated that any future consultation, technical assistance, or client management services would be provided under a new independent contractor agreement. The rate was $300 an hour, with a minimum retainer of $20,000 a month. It also included a clause regarding the licensing of the patented cooling process, which would require a separate royalty fee of 5% on gross sales. We hit send at noon. I went home and turned off my phone. I made myself a sandwich. I sat on my balcony and watched the cars drive by. I knew what was happening on the other side of town. I knew that right now. My father's phone was dinging. I knew that Tessa was probably screaming. I did not have to wait long for the reaction. At 1 o'clock, my landline rang. I had forgotten I even had a landline. It was my mother. I let the machine pick up. Sophia. Her voice filled the living room. It was high and shrill. I just read the email from that lawyer. How dare you? How dare you bring a stranger into this? We are family. You are choosing money over your own blood. Your father is having chest pains. If anything happens to him, it is on your head. Pick up the phone. I stood there, holding my sandwich, listening to the guilt trip. It was the same weapon she had used for 20 years. You are selfish. You are hurting us. You are ungrateful. But this time, the weapon did not cut. I realized that she was not yelling because she was hurt. She was yelling because she was losing control. She was yelling because the hammer had decided to become the architect. I deleted the message. I forwarded the voicemail file to Mara with a short note harassment from adverse party. At 2 o'clock, my father emailed me. It was not a legal threat. It was shorter, sadder. Sophia, please, we need to talk. Just you and me. No lawyers. Let's meet at the coffee shop. We can work this out. I felt a twinge of sadness. I loved my father. I really did. But I loved the father who taught me how to use a caliper. I did not love the businessman who sold me out for a bank loan. I replied, Dad, all communication regarding my employment and IP rights must go through Mara Keaton. I am not authorized to negotiate directly. I hit send. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was the silence of a siege. I was inside the castle, and they were outside, realizing they had forgotten to bring a battering ram. By 3 o'clock, the scope of the disaster expanded beyond the family. Mara called me. We just got a ping from the Summit Harbor Bank legal team, she said, sounding delighted. They were CC'd on the suspension notice from Stonegate yesterday. Now they have seen your resignation. They are freaking out. Why, I asked. Because the loan agreement has a key person clause, she explained. The bank agreed to lend the $5 million based on the stability of the current management team, with the Stonegate contract suspended and the technical lead resigning on the same day. The risk profile of the company just spiked. The bank is demanding an immediate explanation for the restructuring. They are threatening to pull the funding letter. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. My father had tried to leverage me to get the loan. Now, the loss of me was going to kill the loan. They are going to blame me. I said, let them. Mara said, you are not a charity. Sophia, you are a business asset. If they wanted to keep the asset, they should have paid for the maintenance. The weekend passed in a blur of silence and noise. My phone was full of missed calls from my aunts, my cousins, even Eddie. I did not answer any of them. I knew Eddie would understand. The rest of them were just flying monkeys sent by my mother. On Monday morning, I woke up feeling strange. For the first time in my adult life, I had nowhere to be. I made coffee. I sat down to read a book. At 9 o'clock, a courier arrived at my door. He handed me a large envelope. It was from the company. I opened it, expecting a lawsuit, expecting a termination letter. Instead, it was a contract. It was a draft of the consulting agreement I had proposed. They had not signed it yet, but they had redlined it. They were negotiating. They were offering $200 an hour. They were offering a flat licensing fee instead of royalties. I laughed. A loud, genuine laugh that startled me. They were negotiating. For 5 years. I had begged for a salary. I had begged for a title. I had begged for a seat at the table. And I had gotten nothing but scraps and promises. Now, after 3 days of silence and 1 letter from a lawyer. They were sending me contracts. They were finally treating me like a professional. Not because they wanted to, not because they loved me, but because they had no other choice. I called Mara. They sent a counteroffer. I said, "Reject it." She said immediately, "They are bleeding." Sophia, Stonegate has not lifted the suspension. The bank has frozen the credit line. They have 0 leverage. I looked at the contract. I looked at the pitiful attempt to lowball me one last time. "Tell them the rate just went up to $350, I said, "and tell them the royalty is non-negotiable." "You are enjoying this," Mara said. "No," I said, looking at the graduation photo on my mantel. The one where my father was squeezing my shoulder too hard. "I am not enjoying it. I am just finally doing my job." "What job is that?" she asked. "I am managing the family business," I said. I hung up the phone. The system had shifted. The gears were grinding in reverse. For years, I had been the one afraid of losing them. I had been the one terrified of being cast out. Now, I realized that the castle was built on sand, and I was the only one who knew how to pour concrete. I went to my closet and pulled out my best suit. I had a feeling I would need it soon. Not for a job interview, but for the moment, they finally realized that the phase-out plan had just phased out their entire future. They wanted a transition. I would give them a transition. I would transition them from owners to customers, and customers have to pay. The silence from my family lasted exactly 48 hours. It was a tactical silence, designed to make me sweat, to make me doubt my resolve, and to force me to pick up the phone and apologize for ruining their dinner. But while they were waiting for me to break, the rest of the world kept turning. And on Tuesday morning, the world knocked on my digital door. It arrived in the form of an email from a domain I did not recognize. The subject line was not urgent. It was not shouting in all caps. It simply read, "Regarding your recent availability." The sender was Rowan Pike. The name meant nothing to me at first, but the signature block made me sit up straight. Chief Operating Officer, Northbridge Infrastructure Labs. Northbridge was not a local machine shop. They were a massive private equity firm that specialized in acquiring and rehabilitating distressed manufacturing assets in the Midwest. They were the people who bought the factories my father complained about. They were the sharks. The body of the email was short. Ms. Foster. We have been monitoring the supply chain disruptions at Stonegate Mobility. We understand from industry chatter that the technical lead behind their Tier 1 certification has recently stepped back from operations. We do not care about family politics. We care about yield. If you are not contractually bound by a non-compete agreement, I would like to buy you a coffee. Today, 3 o'clock. I stared at the screen. Industry chatter. That meant David at Stonegate had been talking. And if David was talking to Northbridge, it meant the sharks were circling Foster River Works. Smelling blood in the water, I replied with one word. Where we met at a coffee shop on the other side of town, far away from the country club where my mother held court. Rowan Pike was a man who looked like he was cut from the same steel I used to machine. He was sharp, efficient, and wasted absolutely no time on pleasantries. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car, but he drank black coffee out of a paper cup. "You are the reason Stonegate is pausing the contract," he said. It was not a question. "I am currently in a consulting negotiation with the current management," I said, using the legal script Mara had given me. Rowan smiled. It was a dry, thin smile. "I have seen the current management," he said. "Tessa Foster. Great on Instagram. Terrible on yield rates. We did a risk assessment on your family's shop 6 months ago. We passed on acquiring it because the management structure was too insular. But our analysts noted one thing. The operational efficiency was 30% higher than the industry average. That was you. Wasn't it? I did not answer immediately. I took a sip of my tea. I managed the floor. I said, Rowan slid a folder across the table. We are acquiring a facility in Detroit next month, he said. It is 3 times the size of your father's shop. It is a mess. The equipment is old. The culture is toxic. And the client list is shrinking. We need someone to go in there, gut the bad processes, and rebuild the production line from the ground up. We need a director of operations who isn't afraid of grease. He looked me in the eye. I'm not offering you a support role. Sophia, I am offering you the wheel. I opened the folder. The offer letter was on top. I looked at the numbers. Base salary, $175,000 a year. Performance bonus up to 40% of base, full benefits, and right there, in the job description, were the words I had been starving for: full autonomy over technical hiring and process implementation. It was everything I had ever wanted from my father, and it was being handed to me by a stranger who had known me for 10 minutes. Why would you do that? Rowan shrugged. Because I called Stonegate this morning to ask about their vendor list. David told me that if you were running a lemonade stand, he would buy the lemonade. That kind of loyalty does not come from a logo. It comes from competence. I looked at the number again. $175,000. It was more money than my father had ever paid himself. I need a week. I said, You have 48 hours, Rowan replied. We move fast. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling like I was walking on air. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Sophia the daughter. I wasn't Sophia the fixer. I was Sophia the asset. The market had valued me, and the price was high. I got into my car, ready to drive home and call Mara. I was going to tell her to draft the acceptance letter. I was going to tell her to drop the negotiation with my family. I was done. But then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tessa. I am at the Target parking lot on 28th Street. Row G, please. I am alone. I stared at the message. Please. Tessa never said please. Tessa demanded. Tessa manipulated, but she never begged. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. It killed the cat. But in my case, it drove me to a suburban parking lot at 4 p.m. I saw her car immediately. It was the white convertible my father leased for the company. She was parked in the back corner, away from the store entrance, when I pulled up next to her. She didn't get out. She just unlocked the passenger door. I climbed into her car. The air conditioning was blasting. The smell of expensive perfume was overwhelming, but underneath it, I smelled something else. Fear. Tessa looked terrible. The perfect makeup was gone. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing a hoodie and sweatpants. She looked like a college student who had just failed finals week. She didn't look at me. She stared at the steering wheel, her knuckles white. You won, she said. Her voice was flat. I didn't win anything. Tessa. I said, I just quit playing the game. She laughed. A harsh, brittle sound. You think you know what the game is, she said. You think it is about Dad favoring me. You think it is about me wanting to be the boss. Isn't it? I asked. She turned to look at me, and her eyes were red-rimmed. I hate the factory. Sophia, she whispered, I hate the noise. I hate the smell. I never wanted to run it. I wanted to move to Chicago and work in fashion marketing. I had an internship lined up. Then why did you take the job? I asked. Why did you let them push me out? Because Mom made me, she said. I froze. Mom. Tessa nodded. She reached into the back seat and pulled out a manila envelope. It wasn't a legal document. It was a printout of emails between my mother and a venture capital firm called Aurora Equity. Read it, she said. I took the papers. I started to read. The emails dated back 6 months. They were entirely written by my mother. My husband is ready to retire. My mother wrote, but the brand needs a refresh. We are positioning the company as a female-led legacy manufacturer. It is a perfect narrative for your Women in Industry fund. We are putting my daughter, Tessa, in the front seat. She is young, photogenic, and marketable. She is the face you want for the portfolio. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Mom wasn't just supporting Dad's decision. Mom was the architect. She sold them on the image, Tessa said, her voice shaking. She told Dad that if he put me in charge, she could get a valuation of $10 million from Aurora. She told him that the bank loan was just a bridge until the buyout. She promised me that if I played the part for 2 years, I would get $2 million and I could leave. I looked at the email again. Sophia is a technical operator. My mother had written, "She does not fit the visual profile for the acquisition. We will keep her in the back to handle the noise until the deal closes." Visual profile. My mother had traded my career for an aesthetic. She had decided that I wasn't pretty enough, or polished enough, or marketable enough to be the face of her retirement plan. So she cast Tessa as the lead actress and demoted me to the stage crew. I do not even have signing authority. "Sophia," Tessa said, tears finally spilling over. "Look at the bank addendum." She handed me another page. "All checks over $5,000 require the biometric authorization of Vivian Foster." Tessa wasn't the managing director. Tessa was a hood ornament. My mother was driving the car. "Mom calls me every morning," Tessa said. "She tells me what to wear. She tells me what to post. She wrote the email to Stonegate. I told her I didn't know the answer to David's question. I told her we needed to ask you. She forbade it. She said if we asked you, it would look weak. She said we had to fake it until the Aurora deal signed." Tessa looked at me, pleading. "I am trapped. Sophia, if I quit..." She cuts me off. She said she would write me out of the will. She said I would be nothing. "But I can't do this. The bank is calling me every hour. David is screaming at me. I don't know what a yield variance is. I don't know what a tolerance load is. I am going to go to jail for fraud because I am signing things I don't understand." I sat there in the passenger seat of the luxury car that was actually a prison cell, and the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I had been angry at my father for being weak. I had been angry at Tessa for being spoiled. But the real enemy was sitting in the dining room, cutting roast beef and worrying about the floral arrangements. My mother didn't care about the machines. She didn't care about the workers. She didn't even care about the product. She cared about the valuation. She was flipping the family. And to do it, she needed 2 things: Tessa's face and my brain. She just didn't want to pay for my brain, and she didn't want to give me credit for it, because a grim-faced mechanic in work boots didn't fit her female-led luxury legacy narrative. I looked at Tessa. For the first time in years, I didn't hate her. I pitied her. She was just another employee being exploited, except her chains were made of gilt and designer handbags. "Does Dad know?" I asked. "Dad does what Mom tells him," Tessa said bitterly. "He just wants to retire to Florida and play golf. He thinks Mom is a genius for finding this equity deal." I handed the papers back to her. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because Mom is planning something," Tessa said. "She is setting up a meeting with Summit Harbor Bank and Stonegate for Friday. She told Dad that she is going to force you to come back." "Force me?" I asked. "How she is going to threaten to sue you for corporate sabotage," Tessa said. "She is going to say you deleted the files. She is going to say you stole the IP. She is going to destroy your reputation so no one else will hire you. She thinks if she breaks you, you will have to come back and work for free just to save your name." I felt a cold, hard rage settle in my chest. It was different from the anger I had felt before. This was clarity. She was going to accuse me of sabotage. She was going to try to blacklist me. I looked at my watch. It was 5 o'clock. I opened my bag and pulled out the folder from Northbridge. I hadn't signed it yet. I took a pen from my pocket. "What is that?" Tessa asked. "This is my exit strategy." I said, "I signed the offer letter. Sophia Foster, Director of Operations." I put the folder back in my bag. "Tessa," I said, "I need you to do something for me." What she asked. "Do exactly what Mom says." I said, "Go to that meeting on Friday. Let her set the stage. Let her bring the bank and Stonegate and the lawyers. Let her think she has the trap set. But you are not coming back," Tessa asked. "Oh, I will be there," I said, "but I'm not coming to save the deal." "Then why come?" "Because," I said, reaching for the door handle. "Mom thinks she is the only one who knows how to tell a story. I think it is time the investors heard the unedited version. I got out of the car. Don't tell her you saw me. I said, let her think I'm scared. Let her think I am hiding. Tessa nodded. She looked terrified. But for the first time, she also looked relieved. She wasn't the only one carrying the secret anymore. I drove home with the Northbridge contract on the seat beside me. It was my shield. I had a job. I had a future. I had a salary of $175,000 waiting for me. I didn't need them. But my mother didn't know that. She thought I was desperate. She thought I was vulnerable. She was counting on my fear. She was about to learn that when you back a mechanic into a corner, they don't just break down, they dismantle the room. I rang Mara immediately. Accept the meeting for Friday, I said. Are you sure? Mara asked. They are going to ambush you. I know. I said, that is the point. I want everyone in that room, the bank, the client, the family, everyone. I hung up. I spent the rest of the night organizing my files. Not the technical files, the evidence, the patent registration, the email logs, the timeline. My mother wanted a show. She wanted a narrative about a female-led business I was going to give her the performance of a lifetime. The conference room at Summit Harbor Bank was on the 42nd floor. It was a glass cage in the sky, offering a panoramic view of the city that my family had helped build but no longer seemed to understand. The table was made of frosted glass, cold to the touch. The chairs were ergonomic leather, designed for comfort during long negotiations. But no one in that room was comfortable. I sat on the left side of the table next to Mara. On the right side sat my parents and Tessa. My mother was wearing a cream-colored suit that I knew she had bought specifically for the photo shoot announcing Tessa's promotion. She looked impeccable. She also looked terrifyingly brittle, like a porcelain vase that was vibrating on the edge of a shelf. My father looked gray. He was sweating. Despite the aggressive air conditioning, Tessa sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at a bottle of sparkling water as if it contained the answers to a test she was failing. At the head of the table sat Michael Thorne, the Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending. He was not smiling. He had a file open in front of him. It was not the glossy brochure my mother had sent him. It was the audit report regarding the suspended Stonegate contract. Thorne did not offer us coffee. He did not ask about the weather. He looked at my father and spoke with the flat, unemotional tone of a man who managed risk for a living. Grant, we have a problem, Thorne said. When we approved the $5 million credit facility for your restructuring, it was contingent on the stability of your primary revenue streams. Yesterday, Stonegate Mobility suspended all purchase orders. Today, I received a resignation letter from your technical lead. He looked at me for the first time. His eyes were calculating. And now I am hearing rumors that the intellectual property rights to your core manufacturing process are in dispute. Thorne continued. My mother leaned forward. She flashed her signature smile, the one that usually charmed local politicians and Rotary Club presidents. Michael, please, she said, her voice smooth and dismissive. You are overreacting. This is just a standard personnel shuffle. Sophia is taking a sabbatical. We have a transition plan in place. Tessa is fully capable of managing the client relationships. Sophia was merely a support technician. Her role has been exaggerated. I felt Mara stiffen beside me, but I placed a hand on her arm to signal patience. I wanted to hear it. I wanted them to say it on the record. Thorne looked at Tessa. Is that true? He asked. Are you managing the technical response to the Stonegate suspension? Tessa opened her mouth. Her eyes darted to our mother, then to me. I am overseeing the team. Tessa stammered. Thorne picked up a piece of paper. Because I have an email here from David at Stonegate, he said. He says he asked for a root cause analysis on the chassis weld integrity 3 days ago. He says he received a marketing pamphlet about your new eco-friendly paint process instead. He wants to know who is signing off on the load-bearing calculations. My father cleared his throat. We are hiring a new engineer. Michael, we will have someone in place by Monday. Thorne slammed the paper down. It was a sharp, violent sound in the quiet room. You do not have until Monday. Grant, The bank requires a certified operator to secure the collateral. If you do not have a technical lead with a Tier 1 clearance, you are in default of the loan agreement. I am freezing the funds effective immediately." My mother's smile vanished. "You cannot do that," she snapped. "We have vendors to pay. We have the rebranding launch next week. I do not care about your branding." "Vivian," Thorne said coldly, "I care about my money, and right now, your company looks like a shell." The door to the conference room opened. My mother turned around, expecting perhaps a secretary or an assistant. It was Rowan Pike. He walked in with the casual confidence of a man who owned the building. Even though he was just a guest, he was wearing a dark suit, no tie. He carried a single leather folio. "Who are you?" my father asked, standing up halfway. "This is a private meeting." Thorne looked up. "I invited him." "Grant? Mr. Pike represents Northbridge Infrastructure. They are the largest holder of industrial debt in the region. Since your credit rating just dropped, they have an interest in the asset." Rowan nodded to Thorne, then looked at my family. He did not smile. "I am not here to buy your debt, Grant," Rowan said. "I am here to clarify a personnel matter." He walked over to where I was sitting. He placed a document on the table in front of Thorne. "Sophia Foster has accepted a position as Director of Operations for Northbridge," Rowan said. "She starts on Monday. We have also had preliminary discussions with Stonegate Mobility. They have indicated that their vendor certification follows the operator, not the facility. If Sophia is with us, they are moving the contract to our Detroit plant." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum sealing. My father fell back into his chair. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked from Rowan to me, his eyes wide with shock. My mother stood up. Her face was flushed with a sudden, violent color. "That is a lie," she hissed. "She cannot take the client. That is our client. That is our legacy." Rowan looked at her calmly. "Clients do not belong to you, Mrs. Foster. Relationships do, and according to my due diligence, Sophia is the only person in your organization who has a relationship with the engineering floor at Stonegate." Mara stood up then. She opened her briefcase and began laying documents on the frosted glass. One by one, like a dealer laying down a royal flush. "Here is the original patent registration for the cooling process, signed by Sophia Foster." Mara said, "Here are the last 5 years of quality assurance logs, all signed by Sophia Foster. Here is the email chain from this week where Sophia attempted to correct a critical safety error that your managing director ignored." Mara looked at Thorne. "The chain of control is broken. Mr. Thorne, the Foster family is claiming to sell a product they do not know how to make, using a process they do not fully own, backed by a technical lead they have just forced out." My mother turned on me. She ignored the lawyers. She ignored the banker. She looked only at me, and her eyes were filled with a venom I had never seen before. "You did this," she whispered. "You planned this. You ungrateful child. We gave you everything. We gave you a job. We gave you a home. And this is how you repay us, by stealing our business." I stood up. My legs felt steady. My hands were not shaking. "I did not steal anything, Mom," I said. My voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the room. "I worked. I worked for 5 years while you planned parties. I worked while Tessa went to brunch. I worked while Dad played golf. I pointed to the papers on the table. I am not asking for the company. I said, I do not want the building. I do not want the brand. I only want the truth." I looked at my father. Am I the operator? Dad? Or am I just the shadow you keep in the back to make the family look good? My father looked down at his hands. He could not meet my gaze. My mother stepped forward. "You are tearing this family apart," she screamed. Her voice cracked, losing its polished edge. "You are destroying your sister's future because of your jealousy." "Mom," I said, "I am not tearing the family apart. I am just stopping the family from tearing me apart." I looked at Tessa. She was still sitting there, gripping her water bottle. She looked terrified. "Tell them." "Tessa," I said softly. Tessa looked up. She looked at our mother, who was panting with rage. She looked at our father, who was defeated. Then she looked at the bank executive who was ready to foreclose on their lives. Tessa stood up. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was not a legal document drawn up by a lawyer. It was handwritten on hotel stationery. She placed it on the table. "I resign," Tessa said. My mother froze. "What did you say?" "I resign as managing director," Tessa said, her voice shaking but gaining strength with every word. "I cannot do it. Mom, I do not know how to run the factory. I never did. You made me take the title so you could get the investment from Aurora." She looked at Thorne. "I signed the loan documents because my mother told me it was just a formality," Tessa said, "but I do not have the authority to execute the work. If you are looking for the person who runs Foster River Works, she is standing right there." She pointed at me. My mother looked like she had been slapped. She reached out to grab Tessa's arm, but Tessa pulled away. "I am not going to jail for fraud." "Mom," Tessa said, tears streaming down her face, "I am done being your prop." My father made a sound. It was a low, guttural sob. He put his head in his hands. He realized, finally, that his wife's obsession with image had not just cost him his business. It had cost him his daughters. Thorne closed his file. "This meeting is over," he said. "Grant, unless you can produce a signed employment contract with a qualified technical lead by the end of this business day, I am calling the loan. You will have 30 days to liquidate assets." He stood up to leave. "Wait," my father said. He looked up, his eyes red. He looked at me. "Sophia," he whispered, "please, we can fix this. We can tear up the transition plan. We can make you a partner. Just do not leave us. Do not let them take the shop." I looked at him. I saw the man who had taught me to use a wrench. I saw the man who had promised me a legacy and then sold it to the highest bidder. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was distant, like a memory of a pain I used to have. I cannot work for free anymore. "Dad," I said, "I will pay you," he said desperately. "I will pay you whatever you want." I looked at Rowan. I looked at the offer letter in his hand. "It is too late for a salary," I said. I pulled a document from Mara's briefcase. It was the consulting agreement I had drafted over the weekend. "Here's the deal," I said, sliding it across the glass. "Option 1. I walk away right now. I go to Northbridge. Stonegate comes with me. You default on the loan, and the bank sells the factory for parts." My mother gasped. "Option 2. I continued. You sign this. It gives me 51% controlling interest in Foster River Works. It gives me the title of CEO. It gives Tessa a clean exit with a severance package so she can go do what she actually wants to do. And it removes Mom from the board of directors permanently." My mother screamed, "You cannot do that. This is my company. It is not your company." "Vivian," Thorne interrupted, looking at her with disdain, "it is the bank's company, and if Sophia is the only one who can save the collateral, then she sets the terms." I looked at my father. "If you sign it, I will save the Stonegate contract," I said. "I will restructure the debt. I will keep the doors open, but I run it, my way, no more photo shoots, no more fake titles, just work." My father looked at the contract. He looked at my mother, who was vibrating with indignation. He looked at Tessa, who was nodding at him, silently begging him to let her go. He picked up the pen. "Grant," my mother shouted, "don't you dare!" My father looked at her. For the first time in 20 years, he did not flinch. "It is over." "Vivian," he said softly, "we lost." He signed the paper. He pushed it back to me. He looked older, smaller, but somehow relieved. I picked up the contract. I checked the signature. It was valid. I turned to Thorne. "The bank accepts this restructuring?" I asked. Thorne looked at me. He nodded. "If Stonegate stays, the loan stays." I turned to Rowan. "I am sorry." I said, "I cannot take the job in Detroit." Rowan smiled. He did not look angry. He looked impressed. "I figured," he said. but the offer stands if you ever get tired of saving them." He shook my hand and walked out. I put the contract in my bag. I looked at my family one last time. Tessa was crying softly. My father was staring out the window. My mother was refusing to look at anyone. I walked to the door. "Sophia." My father called out. I stopped. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you do it this way? You could have just left. You could have just let us fail." I turned around. I put my hand on the door handle. I didn't leave to get revenge. "Dad," I said, "I left to stop being given away." I walked out of the glass room and into the hallway. I pressed the button for the elevator. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. I watched the numbers count down. 40, 30, 20. I was going back to the factory. I had a shift to run, and for the first time, every bolt, every machine, and every drop of oil belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to Sophia's story. It was a long journey from the shadows to the spotlight, and I hope you enjoyed the ride. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, at work, or maybe in your own workshop? Let me know in the comments below so we can connect. Please do not forget to subscribe to the Jane Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. See you in the next one.